Hey everybody, I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold here with our weekly lecture series. Today's lecture is on the Portuguese Gambit. I wasn't 100% sure what the Portuguese Gambit was when I accepted the lecture, but it was what I thought it was, so that's good. The sponsor has something they want to say, so I'll read what they wrote. This lecture is sponsored by Chris Carrero, I hope I pronounced that right, a Brazilian-American chess enthusiast from Boston, Massachusetts, who hopes to learn more about the Portuguese Gambit. Okay, thanks, Chris. Before we start, you may notice I have some facial tics, which I've had for months, and it seems to be acting up a lot lately. Unrelated to that, I had a CAT scan today about some hearing loss. And then I went to a doctor, the ENT, a couple days ago, ear, nose, and throat. And she was like, "Are you chewing gum?" And I'm like, "No." And then today at the CAT scan, the doctor said, "Are you chewing gum?" So I have a lot of facial tics. People think I'm chewing gum. And one time on my stream, somebody said, "What are you eating?" I'm not eating. So, okay. Now, typically, so I'm going to do a lot of funny facial stuff so you guys can make fun of me in the YouTube comments. I have new medication that I started taking today. It probably won't work yet. Also, it probably won't work at all. Typically, when I do an opening lecture like this one, I start out with a Wikipedia article on the opening, but Wikipedia has an article on the Portuguese opening, which is E4, E5, Bishop B5. I've never heard of that or seen it. But they don't have an article on the Portuguese Gambit, but they do mention it exists. And the Scandinavian article on Wikipedia, it says the Portuguese Gambit exists, but it doesn't give any variations. It just mentions that in the Scandinavian it's legal, but there's no. Now, I did find 3 articles on the internet regarding the Portuguese Gambit. The most important one is on Chessable. It's a Chessable blog, so you can read the article and you'll probably get more out of reading the article than watching this lecture, but don't tell the sponsor that. But I'm going to go over the article. It talks about the different variations and gives some sample games, and it's free. So a lot of stuff on Chessable is not free, but some stuff is. In fact, if you purchase my courses on Chessable, you actually don't have to purchase them. If you want to get the light version, then it's free. So this is from the Chessable blog. This is free. It's on the Portuguese Gambit. The starting position of the Portuguese Gambit is this diagram. And John, you can see the diagram on your computer?
Yes, I can see the diagram.
Okay, good. And we'll go over that when I look at the games in Chessable. In ChessBase. It talks about White's various moves. It talks about why Black is doing this and what Black hopes to achieve. It gives some analysis. It gives some positions. So it's pretty good. It's a good read. It's not very long, and there's some sample games, although unlike my sample games, White won this sample game. I assume, and I can't prove it, when a sponsor says, "I want you to look at the Portuguese Gambit," I assume he wants me to look at it from Black's point of view, and because Black is playing the Portuguese Gambit, and so Black is going to win because that's what the lecture is, going to talk about. So if you want to see White win and you're mad at me, especially if you're the sponsor, and you're like, "What? I wanted White to win." if you go to the Chessable blog and look at the Portuguese Gambit, you'll see at least one game that white won. And then, obviously, if you have a database of chess games, you see dozens of games white won. Okay, so this is a pretty good length article. This game was a draw, the second game that they show. And they show 3 ways for white to play against the Portuguese Gambit. F3, bishop E2, and bishop B5 check. Okay, and black won the last game. Then, this is actually very funny. This article is several pages long, and then at the end of the article, I thought this was funny. Maybe you guys don't have the same sense of humor as I do. It says, what is the idea behind the Portuguese Gambit? I mean, this article is several pages, and it's just one sentence. Black wants to disrupt white's development and avoid a bad bishop after e6. That's it. Okay, so maybe you will learn more from my lecture than this article. Okay. Now, I like to give caveats when I give opening lectures. Okay, if you people in YouTube land play an opening, it doesn't mean it's going to happen. If you spend 90% of your studying time in chess looking at an opening, that opening might happen 5% of the time. So it could be, and then when the opening does happen, then you forget it. And the truth hurts. Okay, so basically stop studying. Now, if you want to play the Portuguese Gambit, and that's part of your repertoire, which is fine, I think the opening is reasonable. Typically, if an opening has the word Gambit next to it, it could be suspicious, unless it's for white, like the Queen's Gambit. But if you're playing a Gambit, like the Elephant Gambit, very suspicious. The Portuguese Gambit's fine. It doesn't lose or anything, and I can prove it by showing you games Magnus Carlsen won. If Magnus Carlsen plays an opening, you can't say that you can't play it because it's not good enough. It's good enough for Magnus, and he played it in the Pro Chess League in a team match. So you don't play openings in a team match if you think they're refuted, because then your team gets mad at you. When you play in a team match, you try even harder. And we have a couple of Magnus games in the lecture. So let's say, as I said earlier, you decide you're going to have an opening in your repertoire. Let's talk about the Portuguese Gambit. Okay, so half the games you can't play it because you're white. You can only play it with black. Then half the games that you're black, you can't play it because your opponent plays e4. And then on move 3, white has to play the move d4, which is the most common move. But white could also play c4, which we'll talk about when I get to chess base. So if you decide every game you're black, you're going to play the Portuguese Gambit, the advantage you're going to have is that if you do play the Portuguese Gambit, your opponent's not going to know it very well because they never face it. And maybe they never even heard of it, never seen it. So that's advantage you, because you play the Portuguese Gambit in many games and your opponent doesn't know it exists. So that's good. Okay, it's not a bad opening. It's reasonable. And the problem is you're not going to have it very often because you have to have black, you have to be against e4, and your opponent has to play d4 on move 3. Okay, another article is on a variation of the Portuguese Gambit, where white plays bishop b5 check and then f3, and we have an example of that in one of the sample games. And this is an article on chess.com, and they have some games, and they have some comments by people who commented. That's even more specific than our lecture. This is on this specific variation. Okay, and I found this just doing a search on Google. There's a website I've never heard of called the Chess Website. I don't know if it's a good website, but they have an article on the Portuguese Gambit, and that's what this lecture is about. So, okay, and it's very short. The article, that's it. It talks about the moves that white can play, and then talks about like what could happen, but it's very short. So it's just for informational purposes. It's not to get better at the opening, but it's the chess website. So probably I didn't sign in because I don't have an account, and maybe if I signed in, there'd be a longer article. Maybe that's what it is. Okay. Now, I haven't explained in detail what the Portuguese Gambit is, but I'm going to do that now. Okay, so I pulled up the ChessBase board, and this is a game Carlsen played against, it says Reprintsev, which I think is Reprintsev, which I think is the name of a lot of people. This guy's 2230. I've heard that name before, but I think the guy I've heard of is a grandmaster, and this person I don't think is. Okay, so the Scandinavian, and I would guess, if I was a guessing man, that queen takes d5 is the most common move right now. And it used to be, like in the 1950s and 60s, queen takes d5 was more common. Then in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, knight f6 became more common. And nowadays, queen d5 is more common. And the big practitioner of the Scandinavian, or as my dad called it, the center counter, was Bent Larsen. Bent Larsen played Scandinavian all the time, and he won a game against Karpov in Montreal 79 that I was actually at. I was in the live audience when I was 9 watching the game. And Larsen almost always played queen takes d5 here, as my dad did. My dad played the center counter. That was his main opening against e4. And my dad always played queen takes d5. Okay, if you want to play the Portuguese Gambit, which is what this lecture is about, then you play knight f6. Okay, so the chances you get this position, if you're playing a chess game, aren't very high, because you could have white, so you're not getting this position, or your opponent doesn't play e4, then you're not getting this position. And occasionally, like if you're playing me on the internet, I often play knight c3 here, but 9 out of 10 times people take on d5. So if your opponent plays e4, you'll probably get this position. Now in this position, white has 3 moves they can make, and we're not going to talk about 2 of them because that's not the Portuguese Gambit. So we're going to skip those. White can play c4, and now black either plays c6, or if you want to play in more Gambit style, e6. Okay, that's another Gambit. This actually reminds me of the Portuguese Gambit when you play e6. Okay, white can also play bishop b5 check. Also played. And then if you play bishop d7, then bishop c4, and the queen is blocked, so you can't take back on d5. So if you play the Portuguese Gambit and you get this position, which you're going to get if you play the Portuguese Gambit, your opponent might play c4, they might play bishop b5 check, or they could play something else, although other moves like knight c3 aren't very common. But knight c3 is a move. Okay, the most common move is d4. Now if you play the Portuguese Gambit, you're very happy because this is the Portuguese Gambit. And in this position, the most common move is knight takes d5. And if your opponent knows theory, I'm not saying they do, But if they do, they probably know knight takes d5 because that's the main move. The Portuguese Gambit is bishop g4. Okay, and this is the starting position of the Portuguese Gambit. So you won't get it very often if you play it a lot, but if you do play it a lot, you'll know it better than your opponent. They're not going to know bishop g4 very well. Now, a lot of people chicken out when they don't know a gambit. You play a gambit, they've never seen the gambit, they've never analyzed the gambit, so they play like a chicken, okay? A chicken who doesn't want to play complicated chess. Maybe some chickens do. If you're not a chicken and you want to be a pawn ahead, then you play f3, never play f3, or you play bishop b5 check and then f3. Then white spends the next few moves defending the d pawn. Bishop f5, the d pawn's attacked, so white plays something like c4, and black's a pawn down, and black has a lead in development, and white's played f3, which isn't good because white wants to play knight f3. Okay. Most people who aren't world-class grandmasters aren't going to play f3 because they're afraid you're going to play preparation and they don't know anything. So they're going to play something boring like bishop e2. And you're not playing a gambit at all because you can take back on d5 a million different ways. So after bishop e2, you can take, they can take with the queen or the knight. Then you can take with the queen or the knight on d5. Usually people take with the queen. Now you're threatening both pawns. Then they play knight c6 and castle queenside. We'll see examples of that in the games. But I'm giving a lecture on the Portuguese Gambit, and I had to make a decision. And I'll tell you the decision I made. I could say, this is a gambit, I'm only going to show gambit lines. So I'm only going to show f3 or bishop b5 check and f3. Then white defends the d pawn and black's a pawn down. But I decided, you know, if your opponent plays bishop e2 or knight f3, you got to know how to play black there too. So I'm going to show you everything. And I have 4 games I'm going to show you because it's a 45-minute lecture. We're already 15 minutes in. I have time to show 4 games. Okay, this game is a 2200 against Carlsen, Untitled Tuesday in 2023. The guy played bishop b5 check, which I think is recommended by a lot of grandmasters. So the idea, for those of you who like tactics, if black plays c6, which black does not do, I don't like to show you stuff black doesn't do, because then you might be like, Finegold showed c6, so I guess I should do that. I'm showing you something you shouldn't do. And I have a funny story about that that's related, that you're not going to think is related, but you'll like it. When I was at Wayne State University, I took a class that had 1 million kids in it. It was in a big lecture hall. And it was taught by a professor. It wasn't taught by a TA or anything. And the professor would give 2 or 3 tests a semester. And every test was true or false. Every test. It was true or false. And every answer was true. If you just wrote true on your test to every question, you would score in the 90%. He'd have some false, but not many. Maybe like 50 questions, 2 were false and 48 were true. And he said the reason he does that, he doesn't care what grades you get. He's not like, oh no, I gave too many A's out. He didn't care about that. He wanted, when he wrote stuff on the test, that it was true. So you might remember it. You know, in 1843, this happened. Well, he wanted that to be true because then you read that and then you might remember that it's true. If he writes half true and half false, you're not going to remember when the class is over what he wrote was true and what was false. So he wanted to write everything was true. So he wouldn't show you c6 because c6 isn't a good move. But I want to show you why you don't play c6 because they take it. And now if you take the queen, they play c7 check. And you're going to lose your queen, whether you play knight d7 and I take your queen, or you play queen d7, I take your queen, and you're going to lose your bishop on d1. So white's going to be a pawn or two ahead. Okay, so black plays knight b d7. Now, in 3 years, if you're like, I saw this lecture on the Portuguese Gambit, and Ben showed c6 and knight b d7. I don't know which one he said was right. Then my teacher would laugh at me because I showed you two things and I told you one was wrong and one was right and you can't remember. Okay, sorry. Sorry to give you that information. Okay. So now the queen's attacked and the d pawn is attacked. White wants to stay a pawn ahead, so white plays f3. Okay, in this game, white played bishop e2, so white's not going to stay a pawn ahead. Bishop e2 is rare. That's why white is 2200 and black is the greatest player who ever lived, because black plays better than white. So I already don't like bishop e2. I don't like this move. Okay, Magnus takes on d5. And now you could argue with me, why are you calling this opening the Portuguese Gambit? There's no gambit. Well, there could have been a gambit, but white decided not to accept the gambit because white didn't want to go into a myriad of tactics, which you're going to see next game. Then you're going to be like, oh, that's why white didn't do that. So some people like crazy tactical games where you're a pawn down or a pawn up. And the next game, which Magnus also won, that's what happened. And the guy got blown off the board. This guy lost in 1,000 moves. He got outplayed because Magnus is better than him. It was a blitz game. So already black is equal. Black has two pieces out and white has his queen out. So I would say black's already equalized. And a lot of times in openings, when you play e6, your bishop on c8 is crying. It happens all the time. Not in the Portuguese Gambit, because you're playing bishop g4, so your bishop's never crying. Okay, the game was sort of boring, especially for a blitz game. It's just an equal position. Nobody has the advantage. White played on the queen side, and Magnus played on the king side. Okay, so Magnus counterattacks in the center. Magnus has a nice bishop on g7. Beautiful bishop. I would still say it's about equal. And then white took a pawn. Is it a poison pawn? Maybe, because you're opening up the bishop on this diagonal. But people like taking pawns. So, okay, attacking Magnus's queen. Okay, and then knight h5, and this is annoying. So one of Magnus's ideas is if white plays f4, we could take on f4, then we could take the knight on e5 and fork again. So the guy played knight takes c6, attacking Magnus's rook. So if Magnus takes the rook and white takes the rook, white's up 2 pawns. So Magnus attacks the knight. Magnus has a double attack. The guy plays a spite check. Magnus has a double attack again. And that's it. So the guy got out-calculated, didn't lose as a result of the opening, but in my opinion, white got no advantage out of the opening because white didn't try to get an advantage. white was trying not to get into some tactical melee where Magnus knows theory and he doesn't. So if you play the Portuguese Gambit and your opponent doesn't want to save their d-pawn and lets you take it back, typically it's just equal. And most people with white want to get an advantage, so it makes more sense to try to keep the d-pawn and be a pawn up, and the game's interesting. Like, if a computer was playing another computer, Stockfish was playing Leela, I think that the engines and the AI would try to keep that pawn on d5. Because I think if they let black take the pawn back, the evaluation is just equal. And white wants to have an advantage in chess, especially in the Scandi. Okay, and then the guy played down a piece because it's a blitz game, but black's up a piece. And for some reason, Magnus has good technique. Magnus attacking all those pawns. Like, I would be resigning here. This is resigns. If I was playing a 500, I wouldn't resign. If I was playing Magnus, I'd resign. Okay, but it's a blitz game, so the game just goes on for no reason. And then white resigned because white's losing all his pawns. So in that game, black equalized on move 5. Black got the advantage on move 15. And black was winning on move 25 because Magnus is better than his opponent. And that game, white didn't show any aggression. White just played solid and got an equal position and then got outplayed. Okay, the next game you're going to like more because white tried, and trying is the first step to failure. Okay, white is a better player here. Magnus is still black. This is Suri Vaibhav. He's 2542 GM. This was played in the Pro Chess League in 2018. So this is a rapid game, and it's a team tournament. So Magnus has to win for his team, so he can't be playing no silly opening. Okay, same thing, because that's what the lecture is. It's on this position. And white played f3. Black sacrifices a pawn, forcing white to play f3. Okay, and now if it was black's turn to move and black could take on d5, white's position's silly because white played f3 instead of like knight f3. So white plays c4. And white says, I may be playing silly, but I'm a pawn ahead, and I have a million pawns in the center. Okay, the truth hurts. Okay, Magnus plays e6. That's what you play in this position. And if black could move again and take on d5, again, white's position is silly. White has nothing developed. White's played f3. And black got his pawn back. So white takes. White's a pawn up. And now, in Gambit style, we don't take back on e6. We develop. Knight c6. Black has 3 pieces developed, and white has 0. Okay? And the engine says it's very complicated, and a lot of openings in chess, black is slightly worse, and they're trying to equalize. And when you're rated 200, 300, 400 points higher than your opponent, that's not what Magnus is looking for. Magnus is looking for rock'em sock'em chess, and let's see who calculates better. The answer is not Magnus's opponent. He doesn't want a position where the engine says all zeros, boring, drawn endgame. Magnus wouldn't mind that against like Caruana or Nakamura, but not against 2500. Got to get positions like this where it's easy to make a mistake. Okay, he took on f7. Now Magnus has 4 pieces developed, including his king. White has no development. So you could argue white's up 2 pawns. That's good for white. You could argue black's king is on f7. That's good for white. And you could argue black has 3 pieces out. Black's 4th piece can come out. Black has a 5th piece that can come out with tempo. And black's threatening the d4 pawn already. And all of white's pieces are on the back rank. And white's played f3, weakening his king. And all of those arguments are correct. And then you pick a side. Magnus picked black. Okay, so bishop e3 defends the pawn. Bishop e4 check. King f2. Rook e8. Black has everything developed. Knight c3. If you've ever had a chess lesson with me or have watched one of my lectures or have seen my videos, then you know what Magnus did here. We'll ask John because he's the only one watching. What did black play in this position? Based on my teachings.
Rook takes e3.
Rook takes e3. Always sacrifice the exchange. If you want to play as well as Magnus, just blindly follow my rules. Okay, king takes e3. Now Magnus does a good calculation, plays knight takes d4. Okay, so in this position, if white plays the obvious move, queen takes d4, I didn't use an engine, so I could be wrong. I think queen e7 check is good because I'm threatening bishop c5. And if you play king f2, I play bishop c5. If you play king d2, I play rook d8. And king f4, there's good and there's not good. That looks not good. Bishop d6 check. I'm assuming white gets checkmated here. I haven't done any analysis. I can't prove it. Although I do see mate in 3. There could be mate in 2 or mate in 1. But I see mate in 3. Check, check, mate. Can't argue with that. There could have been a mate in 2 or mate in 1, but I didn't see it. I saw mate in 3. Okay, and it's mate. Okay, so Magnus concluded white couldn't play queen takes knight, and white also concluded that and didn't take the knight. Okay, so typically out of the opening, you don't have your king on e3 and all your pieces on the back rank. So the truth hurts. Okay, he played king f2, getting his king back to safety. Bishop c5, the truth hurts. Knight a4, attacking the bishop. Bishop c2, forking the queen and the knight. You can't lose your knight, so white decided to give his queen away to get rid of some of black's pieces. Technically, material's equal now. It's 2 rooks. It's a rook, a bishop, and a pawn for a queen. But white still has no development on the king side. Queen e7, attacking the knight. Rook e8. If you take, queen e1 is mate. If you don't see queen e1, then queen e3 check wins the rook. So that's also good. Mate's better. White played bishop d3. Okay, John, what do we do?
I believe we play rook takes e4.
He played c5 first. You were right. Then he played rook takes e4. Magnus just wanted me to look bad. Magnus sacked 2 exchanges this game. That's how you do it. And white's king isn't very good. And white resigned. Black's threatening, queen takes g2. And there's no defense. If you play king f1, you hang your rook. If you play knight f3, then queen takes g2 is even stronger. Actually, even better is queen e2 mate with advantage. So knight f3 hangs mate in 1. King f1 hangs the rook. The only move that makes any sense is rook to d2. And now several things win for black. I'm trying to think what I would do. We take c4 is good. Queen c1 check is good. Queen e4 check is good. Yeah, rook d2 is better than resigning, but I'm sure the engine says like +7 for black. Anyway, white never moved his rook and knight. And if you just showed up to the lecture, you put the YouTube video on at this point, you probably think the king didn't move, but that king moved a lot. King f2, king e3, back to e1. So that guy didn't know what he was doing. He got into a tactical melee, and then Magnus is better than him. So he won for his team. Okay, not everybody is Magnus, and not all the variations are the same. Now, some of you are like going to write into the YouTube comments, Magnus is no good. Why don't you show a game of the world champion? Okay, I do what the audience likes. Here's a game Gukesh is white and loses to Matlakov. Now, this was a blitz game played in 2020. In 2020, Matlakov was better than Gukesh. In 2026, Gukesh is better. Okay, so Gukesh in 2020, 6 years ago, he was 12 or 13 years old. Okay, so he's white. He's a kid, so he's going to play, you know, like a kid. Okay, he plays f3. Kids want to take material and play aggressive and complicated. Okay, this is the same as the Magnus game. And then bishop b5 check. In the Magnus game, white played c4 and Magnus played e6. Okay, here Gukesh played bishop b5 check. Knight bd7. Black's threatening to take the pawn back. So c4. Now, you got to play in Gambit style, and Matlakov played in Gambit style, played a6 and b5, destroying white's pawn center. So white's going to be a pawn up, or maybe 2 pawns up, but he's going to have this terrible pawn on f3. He's going to have an isolated d pawn on d4, and black has a big lead in development. Okay, so white's a pawn up, but 3 pieces out to 1. Pawn's on f3, which is terrible. You always want the knight on f3. And white has almost no development, and white has an isolated d pawn. Probably white's still better, but black has good practical chances. A lot of times in this opening, black plays knight b4 and tries to get into c2. If you remember, Magnus played bishop c2 and won the game because of it. Okay, knight e2, knight b4, just like I said. Castles. And it's funny, black played e6. If I was playing black, you couldn't hold my hands back far enough for me not to play knight c2. Why didn't black play knight c2? I don't know. But white allowed knight c2, so that's why these guys are playing, and I'm giving a lecture. I don't know how to play, but I know I play knight c2. I'm not lying to you. If I was black, I'd play knight c2. You guys with your engines on YouTube after the fact, you can say the engine says knight c2 is terrible because of this and that.
What about bishop d3 there?
Bishop d3, I take it. And then I take your rook. I'm not, by the way, that could be what happens, and then eventually white wins the knight, white's down the exchange, always sack the exchange. So I don't know why black didn't play knight c2 and why white allowed it, but black played e6 to get his bishop out on f8. Knight g3. You could still play knight c2, but it's not as good. Bishop g6. Now if you play knight c2, white plays rook a2, and the knight's trapped on c2. So black played bishop d6 because the knight's not really attacked because it's pinned. Knight c3, castles, the knight's still not attacked. Knight e4. And Black is down a pawn and has compensation. I'd probably take white because I don't think black has enough compensation. But black has long-term compensation because white has this isolated pawn and white's pawn's on f3, opening up the diagonal to his king. Okay, and eventually black outplayed white. White couldn't find good squares for his pieces. Now white's pawns are all attacked. Black got his pawn back. Obviously, black's better now. White's pawn structure is terrible. And this isn't part of the lecture, really, because this isn't the opening. But basically, black was a pawn down. Black had compensation. Then black outplayed white. It's a blitz game. And Gukesh wasn't as strong as Matlakov when Gukesh was 12. Although Gukesh was pretty good when he was 12. But he got completely crushed this game. One good thing about this game is a lot of people, when they don't resign, they think people make fun of them. Like, why didn't you resign? You were a queen down. And you think you might want to resign next time because you don't want people being mad at you. Well, you're going to notice Gukesh don't resign. If the world champion doesn't resign, then you guys should never resign too. Gukesh could have resigned 20 moves before he resigned this game. Gukesh gave all his pieces away instead of resigning. Okay, so black's up a piece. You can't take the bishop because queen takes rook. So white could resign. Black's up a bishop. Black has the two bishops. But Gukesh loses a lot more material before he resigns. Now black's up a rook. White has no rook g1. It's hard to play rook g1 and not resign because rook g1 is not very aggressive. I didn't understand that knight sacrifice. Gukesh still not resigning. Down a rook and a bishop. Okay, now with trading queens, now Gukesh resigned. Okay, now it's getting silly. Although it was getting silly before. So in that game, black got compensation for a pawn. I don't think he got enough, it's my opinion. And then he won easily. So I guess my opinion's not worth very much. Okay, and last game, but not least, Julian Hodgson, who's a very dynamic, strong British player. He was one of the top 5 players in Britain for about 20 years. He's playing Marisca Kouwenhoven, 21-20. And Hodgson likes to play interesting openings, gambits. So the Portuguese Gambit's right up his alley. Okay, his opponent's 2100, doesn't want to get involved in any tactical melee, so plays bishop e2 and says, let's equalize. When your opponent's trying to equalize with white, that's good. Okay, queen takes. We talked about this before. Black's attacking 2 pawns. Knight f3. Black castles queenside, puts pressure on d4. Black has a lead in development. Black has everything developed. Black's getting a kingside attack going. There's some tricks. Black's king is pretty safe. White plays a3 and says, I can attack too. And then Hodgson plays in the center. And now the game is a complete mess. Everything's hanging, opposite side castling, calculation. And that's not what white wanted. When white played bishop e2, white was like, I don't want to win a pawn. I just want a solid position that's equal. Well, this is not a solid position that's not equal. And it turns out the way the game goes, black has a massive attack and white never gets an attack. Knight takes e4. Bishop takes h2 check, confusing the audience. If knight takes h2, queen takes queen. King h1 looks terrible, so king f1. Black's got the king side attack going. And black has an attack against white's king, and white has no attack against black's king. Also, we're on move 1,000, and white hasn't moved the queenside pieces yet. Bishop f4. If you take the bishop, queen h1 is checkmate. It was a bishop sacrifice to open up the e file for black's rook. Also, black wants to play bishop takes, which wins a pawn and opens up white's king. Now black's threatening rook takes e3 check. That's called sacrificing the exchange when you're not even sacrificing the exchange because it's illegal to take it. King d3. Rook takes. If pawn takes rook, queen takes queen. White's king is running around. c6. Then if queen a8 check, we have bishop b8. If you take my bishop, we have mate in 2. It's possible we had mate in 1, but I didn't see it. I saw mate in 2. I'm going with it. It could be mate in 1. I don't see mate in 1. Okay, so c6. a4. Stopping queen b5 check and rook b5 check. Bishop b8. Always sacrifice the exchange. And white resigned. White has one legal move. King a5. Then queen d2 check. If king b6, queen b4 is mate. And if b4, queen b4 is mate. So we can pre-move queen b4 mate. So after sacking the exchange, white resigned. White's queen was trapped in the corner, and white never moved her rook, and white's king went for a walk all over the board, just like Magnus's opponent. So those were some examples of active play for black in the Portuguese Gambit by some strong grandmasters. Even Gukesh lost with white. Magnus won with black. So the best players in the world are playing this with both sides. And if you look at the articles that I referenced in the beginning of the lecture, you can see more information on the Gambit and do your own research. Look at some other games. I wanted to show games where I thought the player with black was pretty good. This is what I want you to play bad for. And in one case, the player with white was really good. That's the Portuguese Gambit. Black sacks a pawn. Sometimes white doesn't take it. Black gets active play. And as we saw in more than one case, sometimes white's king gets exposed because white's busy trying to be a pawn up instead of developing their pieces. So if you like active gambit play, you'll like the Portuguese Gambit with black. I want to thank our sponsor again, Chris Carrero. If you want to sponsor a lecture, look in the description of the video, contact my wife, Karen, and you can sponsor a lecture on your choice of topic. I hope you enjoyed the Portuguese Gambit. I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold. I hope that was okay. I'll see you guys next time with more weekly lectures. Bye, everybody.